Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She's the founder of the Schiller Institute and the convener of the International Peace Coalition. Today is February 4th, 2026, and you'll see in a moment why this is an important date. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. You can send your questions and comments to Helga via email to questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them on the chat page. Well, today marks the expiration date of the New START agreement, which was the last agreement between superpowers to limit the development and spread of nuclear weapons. In September 2025, President Putin announced that he would be willing to continue negotiations for up to a year after this expiration date if the US was involved in negotiations. But the Russians have said that so far they've had no indication from the Trump administration that there would be a continuation of negotiations. Trump said yesterday, if it expires, it expires. We'll just do a better agreement. So Helga, how significant is it that there has been no response from the Trump administration to Putin's call for talks? And does this mean that we are less safe today and heading toward a nuclear arms race?
I'm afraid that the answer to that is yes. The Russian response to Trump's non-answer was no answer is also an answer. And, it is very clear that this is the last of all the arms control agreements, the ABM Treaty, the INF Treaty, the Open Sky Treaty, and now finally the New START Treaty. So it's not just that, which obviously is in one sense the most significant one, but basically we are now in a situation where the relation among the largest superpowers, nuclear superpowers, is not anymore transparent. It for sure will lead to an arms race on all sides. It may even affect the non-proliferation that new countries would want to, acquire nuclear weapons. And, what is really the worst about it is that it increases the sense of non-trust, non-transparency. And it's quite remarkable that Pope Leo XIV, in his recent sermon, urged both sides, the United States and Russia, to renew such a START treaty by basically praising peace, saying that only peace is something which protects the life of the people. And also, very importantly, given the fact that the Pope is an American, the head of the American Bishops' Conference, Bishop Coakley, also reiterated a similar demand, obviously with a clear message to the Catholics in the United States that they should create a certain atmosphere of pressure for Trump, if that is possible at all. So I think we are definitely in a given the fact that the world is already in this incredible turmoil, realignment, complete, breakdown of old assumptions like the rules-based order. This is just one additional element which makes the whole situation much more insecure.
Well, one of my colleagues pointed out that there's been very little talk in the US from commentators about the significance of the failure to negotiate a replacement for the expiring START agreement. Now, given that the governments of leading nations in the EU and NATO are talking daily about the threat from a Russian invasion and the need to prepare for war, has there been any response, an outcry in Europe about the expiration of the START agreement?
No, not of any significance at all. And I think that is another sign, that, military experts who you can trust because of their expertise have repeatedly said in the past, actually months and years, that we are de facto in a situation which is more dangerous than at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, for the very simple reason that the eastward expansion of NATO and the establishment of offensive systems nearby the Russian border in Poland and Romania has de facto created a situation of a reversed Cuban Missile Crisis, except nobody mentions that. If the Russians or the Chinese or anybody else would put similar systems to the close to the Mexican-American border or the American-Canadian border, you could hear the yelling from Washington, deafening the whole world. But if they do the reversed expansion of offensive systems close to the Russian border, that is not even acknowledged. Even that is the main reason why we have a war in Ukraine and why we are really at an extremely dangerous situation. So now if these last arms control mechanisms are abandoned, the danger of even an accidental war or a technical failure leading to a catastrophe are all becoming much more likely. Nevertheless, despite all of these extremely worrying developments, there is no debate in the media or in the political scene in Europe or in the United States. And I think that is rather a symptom of an effort to control the debate and keep the population in the darkness, which I think is what really is worrisome, because like the in the meantime famous or infamous admission by Mark Carney in Davos that the rules-based order was a fraud from the beginning and only a cover-up to to make the powerful able to do what they want at the expense of the weaker ones. That all contributes to a climate that I think, if you look at the totality of what's going on, we are, I don't know if we even have democracy. If you look at the sharpening of the tone against people who have different opinions than the officially allowed one in Europe, in the European Union, the prosecution of journalists who are just trying to, develop to their best knowledge a counter to the official narrative because their professional morality compels them to do so, and then they be put on an index. They get, basically squeezed out of public life altogether. Then, if you look at the election process, which is increasingly dominated by money, do we still have a democracy, or do we have plutocracies where the money of billionaires going into super PACs, going into lobbying, which is not even visible, and likewise, whoever gets a place in Europe in the parliamentarian party system or can run a campaign in the United States, you need a lot of money. And, so it's no longer democracy where every vote counts in the same way. But I think we are in a very dangerous escalation towards authoritarian systems, not where it's generally said in China and in Russia. That's a different question. They have different systems, but in the West, and nevertheless, people are intimidated and not really making that an issue, while it is really something touching upon our own future in the most direct way.
Well, in the context of what you just said, it seems as though the discussion of a military buildup in NATO, which is the option if you're preparing for war, is not serious because of the economy, the economic crisis in Europe, the lack of unity in the EU, the unpopularity of governments. And you stepped into that void with a roundtable discussion on January 12th, which led to a declaration, let us create a movement of world citizens, to have the citizens step onto the stage of history and do something. What's been the response to that so far?
Well, I must say that the response in the West, let's say European countries, has been that people would say, oh, this is very good, I'm glad you are doing this, but then, not really having the courage to do much about it. Much different responses I got from several people in the global south, where people responded much more enthusiastically, saying this is absolutely on the mark. This was an intervention whose time had come urgently. So I'm confident that, in building such a movement of world citizens, that will progress much better in the global south, simply because, these countries are in a much stronger motion towards the establishment of a just world economic system, while the Western people seem to somehow be depressed and pessimistic, and it's definitely something which we need to change. But as of now, I think the response from the global south was much, much better.
Well, that declaration is posted on the Schiller Institute website, and people can read it, download it, sign it, circulate it, and join with us to create the awakening that it's not acceptable just to allow this to continue. Now, in that context, we have several wars going on. We have threats of more wars, warnings that there'll be more sanctions, more blowback. But there are apparently searches for diplomatic solutions. There are negotiations scheduled for Abu Dhabi or perhaps Oman between the US, Ukraine, and Russia. And also a report of a February 6th meeting coming up in Istanbul between the US and Iran. What do you expect will come from these negotiations? Are these serious, or are they just kicking the can down the road?
Well, they're obviously very complicated, because on the Ukraine situation, as of now, pending what will happen on Friday, it seems to be stuck because, the Ukrainian side does not want to accept the formula, which seems to be accepted between the United States and Russia, namely that the United States will give security guarantees to Ukraine after a deal if Ukraine gives up certain territorial concessions, meaning, those parts of the Donbas which Russia has not yet occupied militarily. In the Ukraine, it seems that the debate is growing among the population, that, it becomes so absolutely clear that this war is lost. It could never have been won. The brutal winter, which is minus 20 degrees Celsius, with a lot of the energy infrastructure being destroyed. So many cities have incredible numbers of people freezing. It seems that, according to Western military experts, the Russians, despite these attacks on the energy grid, which was mostly targeting those energy grids which supply the military expenditures and production, that basically, nevertheless, this all has led to a situation where people say maybe we should think about the people first and not so much about some kilometers of territory. So it seems that the situation inside Ukraine is becoming pretty desperate, simply because of the accumulation of 4 years of war and, the whole losses and now the winter. So I can only assume that, the efforts are not completely hopeless, but the key question is, will the Europeans, or will some Europeans still create in my view, the illusion for Ukraine that the war can be continued? Now, the General Secretary Rutte was just in Kiev. He addressed the Rada, the parliament there, and it is, still full of illusions, because he basically hinted that after a deal was made, that Western troops would be in Ukraine. Now, Western troops are NATO troops, and therefore it is one of those conditions which have been absolutely rejected by Russia as a red line, which is unacceptable, because that's, in a certain sense, that's the whole reason why the war started in the first place 4 years ago. And for Rutte to now go and tell the Ukrainians that these European troops will be there, when that is the red line over which the whole war has been fought, seems to be pretty irresponsible on the side of Rutte, because it cannot be maintained. If you want to have peace, there will be no such European troops, maybe some other troops as a peacekeeping force, but not from countries which are NATO countries. So that is therefore, and other people have pointed to the fact that even if there is an agreement, it would go to the Congress, to the Senate to be ratified. So in any case, one cannot expect a very quick settlement as such. Concerning the Iran situation, likewise, there are seemingly unmatchable lines. For example, the Iranian government insists that they have the sovereign right to have a nuclear program, a civilian nuclear program, and they have the sovereign right to have these long-range missiles as part of their defense system, both of which are supposedly to be negotiated away. So the danger naturally is a strike, military strikes. I think Iran has indicated that they would go for a regional war. That would mean they would hit Israel, they would hit all the US military bases in the region. They would probably close the Strait of Hormuz, and that all could have unforeseeable consequences in terms of if 1/3 of the oil supply of the world would be interrupted. Given the absolute volatility of the financial system, this could blow out the system right there. Likewise, depending on what will be the Israeli response to a strong Iranian counterstrike, would they eventually use a nuclear weapon, then all bets are off, and we could be on the way to World War III in the short term. So we are sitting obviously in a complete powder keg, on a complete powder keg, and that's why our intervention to return to international law, to establish a new security and development architecture, which must take into account exactly all those security concerns of Ukraine, of Russia, of Iran, of Israel. In other words, there is no such thing like a divisible security, but it can only be an indivisible security which takes into account the interest of all, or else it does not work. That is what I have been arguing since the special military operation started in February, and I think it is becoming more obvious to more people by the day.
Well, I did get a question in from a leading Trump supporter from Louisiana who pointed out that last weekend it appeared as though an attack was imminent on Iran, but then things changed and it was postponed. And he asks, has Trump taken an attack on Iran off the table, or just postponing it, waiting for a more propitious moment? What do you think?
Well, I don't know what President Trump thinks. I only know that there are many other forces in the calculation. The narrative about what happened in Iran, the Western media basically say this terrible regime, they're killing thousands and thousands of their own citizens, they're committing rape and murder and whatnot. Then if you look at what the Iranians are saying, they say that the demonstrations which started at the end of last year because of the worsening economic situation was creating hardships for the population, and therefore they started to talk to the demonstrators and promising them they would remedy the economic plight. But then that there would have been foreign agents using ISIS tactics in murdering people, killing people, destroying buildings, malls, hospitals, kindergarten, whatnot, and that it was the killing from the side of these ISIS-type mercenaries from abroad, which caused the bloodshed. And they also point to the fact that Pompeo had on January 2nd a tweet in which he said, yeah, bravo to these demonstrators, everyone has a Mossad agent on his side. From Pompeo to put this tweet out is quite amazing. So this has all the signs of a regime change operation from the outside. And then, after the Iranian government was able to somehow diffuse this, then they say, you see how brutal the government goes against its own people. So the narrative is clearly very manipulated, and therefore some people said, if the CIA did not succeed this time, they have many more agents in place for the next round. So I'm not at all at rest that I think this conflict is over, because the idea of regime change remains, and so I think I'm extremely concerned about that situation as well.
Now, part of the strategic geometry coming out of Davos was the discussion of, is there an alternative to the collapsing unipolar order? And we see this emerging with the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the moves in the Global South to establish a new development architecture. Now, one of the areas of a fight in this is over which way will India go. The Biden administration sent Blinken and all sorts of other people to India repeatedly to try to win the Indians away from working with China and Russia. And it was very much unsuccessful. But now there's the talk that Trump issued a threat of sanctions against India if they continued to buy Russian oil. And the reports are being leaked out that India did agree to stop buying Russian oil. You've said that India has a strong history as part of the non-aligned movement. Where do you see this fight going? Is it possible that there can be some kind of resolution here that will allow for cooperation between the US and the BRICS, or is that out of the question?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer, because India, obviously, with Modi, was transformed from a more secular state into a Hindu state. And that has had certain implications of how the Indian position was in respect to Gaza, in respect to Pakistan. You have a very strong British tradition inside the Indian institutions, which amazed me when I visited India several years ago, repeatedly, several times. There was a clear underestimation about the role of the British Empire in respect to India. The Indians also have, in my view, they are now the largest population. They're larger than China. They are clearly, one of the coming world powers. Their economy, their economic growth rate was absolutely fantastic. They have areas where they are really making big advances, like space, artificial intelligence, the whole IT sector, but also many, many other areas. So they definitely are one of the big world powers. On the one side, they are part of the BRICS. There was the rapprochement between Modi and Xi Jinping. On the other side, there is now this free trade agreement between India and the European Union. Von der Leyen went there and celebrated this big. I think it's not yet decided, because we are not against European countries having trade relations with India or Mercosur or whatever. The question is, what do you make out of it? Are you using it for geopolitical manipulation, or are you using it for the improvement of trade relations, the economies based on a win-win cooperation? I think we have to look at it as it plays out. I think that India will also maybe, I don't know if this capitulation in respect to Trump's demand, if that's really true, we have to look at that. But even if that would be true, it can lead to a tremendous backlash, because I think India is a proud nation. They have, despite all the problems I mentioned, they regard themselves as a true non-aligned country. They think they are one of the biggest civilizations on the planet, and they don't like to be pushed around. They also have a very strong 80-year-long friendship with Russia, which was just celebrated and emphasized again between Putin and Modi. So I think, as you can see by the many elements I'm referencing, that it's a complicated situation, but I believe that they will not be pushed around. And if there is an effort to subdue them, it may lead to a blowback people have not anticipated.
I have one more question, actually two questions on the political situation around this overall strategic crisis. You had in the United States in Texas, there was an election last weekend, actually two elections, one of which was a Democratic district where a Democrat won an open seat in Congress. The other was a state Senate race in Fort Worth, Texas, in a district that Trump won by almost 17% 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, but the Democrats won it by 14%. So with the midterm elections coming up, with the possibility that the House could swing over to the Democrats, the question is, should the Republicans be worried that they're going to lose their margin, their thin margin in the House of Representatives, given the combined effects of the economic crisis and the strategic situation?
Well, I would not be surprised, because, the MAGA movement, they voted for Trump because Trump did promise the last time in the last presidential election campaign, that he would be a president of peace, that he would end all wars, that he would not start new ones, and that he would make America great by reviving the economy. Now, none of these things has materialized. There was basically the war in Ukraine is not ended. There was the kidnapping of Maduro. There is the talk about Cuba. There's the massive, beautiful armada, which Trump called it, amassing in the Gulf region. So I can imagine that the people who are, they probably would overlook the foreign wars, even so that is a big concern. But economically, they're not doing well. And if push comes to shove, the Americans are not so much foreign policy oriented as they are concerned, about their family, their life, income, the circumstances, and that is not going well at all. I mean, the United States has an ever increasing gap between multi-billionaires who are now aiming to become trillionaires. I mean, that's how absurd do you want to become? How many caviar can you eat in your life? Not $1 trillion for sure. And while the majority of the people have more hardships, the health system, there are millions of people who are falling off the cliff. So I think that Trump, if Trump wants to win the midterm election, he should really learn from the Chinese, meaning go back to the real American system of economy and, basically invest and rebuild the American economy, and not waste all of that money in the military-industrial complex, who just fill their pockets, but otherwise at the expense of the real economy.
Another sign of the panic with the upcoming elections was the placement into the Jerusalem Post of an attack on Jose Vega and his campaign in the Bronx that went back to the old slanders against Lyndon LaRouche as an anti-Semite, falsely attacking Jose as an anti-Semite, This does seem to reflect the reaction against the shift that's occurring among American voters against the power of the Israel lobby, the Zionist lobby, and the continuation of the slaughter of people in Gaza. Do you think this will be a factor, an increasing factor as time approaches the November midterm elections?
Well, when the slender against my late husband was invented, I think it was in 1975, because I remember it very well. It was, and one of the inventors told one of our members, look, we will put this label on LaRouche. We know he's not an anti-Semite, but there's nothing you can do against it. At that time, it did function, unfortunately, to a certain extent, because it was carried by the ADL, it was carried by the mainstream media. In the meantime, in the Western countries, the killing of somebody politically, their reputation, by labeling them with all kinds of slanders, anti-Semitism, left, right, extremist, whatnot, it has been used against anybody. So I think that the usefulness or the effectiveness of these slanders has diminished, and there is an increasing number of people who say, what, you are not slandered, there must be something wrong with you. And if somebody calls you an anti-Semite, maybe you are against genocide, or if you are called right-wing or left-wing extremism, maybe you are for the common good. So I think the effectiveness of these slanders has been greatly diminished. It is just an effort to keep intimidating people, but I think it is not going to be effective. And I think everybody knows that Jose Vega is the last thing in the universe, rather than being an anti-Semite. He's a humanist, and how can you have an image of men which regards every human being as in the image of the Creator, everyone, and that there is only one human race, there are no races? How can such a person be an anti-Semite? It is epistemologically completely impossible.
Well, on that note, we come to the end, and there's again this Friday, a weekly meeting of the International Peace Coalition, which has been meeting every single week now. I think this might be the 140th consecutive week coming up. What are the plans for this Friday?
Well, we will have definitely speakers who talk about this need to have the defense of international law, which is in great danger, and to have a real movement of world citizens. I mean, look, I said earlier that I think that the whole system of democracy, of governance, is in grave danger, because both in the United States, for different reasons, and in Europe, you have cutting down on civil rights. The ability of the individual to participate in the government, which is a constitutional right in the American Constitution, and which is a constitutional right in Europe as well, that government is only legitimate with the consent of the governed. Increasingly, the governed, the voters, are made obsolete, are made impotent, are pushed aside, which has the terrible effect that people think, oh, there's nothing you can do anyway, and people become pessimistic. And pessimism is very, very dangerous. I have made the argument in the past that pessimism is a disease that once a people is affected by it, it can lead to catastrophic results, like we have seen in the 30s in Germany. And you can see a similar tendency today in Europe. You can see it in the United States. And that is why, we absolutely have to have a serious discussion and a serious movement of how can we defend our republics. I think this was Benjamin Franklin who said, I give you a republic, see that you can defend it. I always mix it up with George Washington. In any case, one of the two said it, and it's absolutely true. And, we have to have a movement of people who are patriots, but who are world citizens at the same time. And according to the great German poet of freedom, Friedrich Schiller, there is no contradiction between being a world citizen and a patriot, as long as you put the interest of the humanity as a whole in cohesion with your national interest. And then there is no contradiction. So that will be a big part of the discussion. Naturally, then we will hear what the world looks like one day after the New START Treaty went out of business. That's obviously an extremely hot topic. And naturally, we will look at what happens with these discussions in Oman, Istanbul, about Ukraine and Iran. So absolutely come, because we want to unify the international peace movement, which is still one of the big challenges, because many groups are for peace, but they're all disunified and therefore not effective. So this is the place to come to on Friday.
That's at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and you can get the link to it from the schillerinstitute.com website. So Helga, once again, thanks for joining us this week, and we look forward to hearing from you on Friday at the IPC Zoom call, and then again next week.
Yes, and join us.